Imagine a Neanderthal family, 10 of them, huddled together in the mouth of a dark cave, their backs to the cold wind, wrapped in furs, whispering in a strange tongue under flickering firelight. It's the image we've all seen, over and over again, in books, documentaries, and even school textbooks. A lonely group, isolated and small, facing the brutal ice age alone. But what if that's wrong? What if this idea of Neanderthals as isolated survivors is one of the biggest misconceptions in anthropology? Welcome to Prehistoric Medievals, and if you're fascinated by ancient truths that challenge old myths, hit that subscribe button right now, because you're not going to want to miss where this story goes. For decades, people believed Neanderthals lived in tiny groups, 5, maybe 10 individuals at most. That belief was based on early finds from the 19th and early 20th centuries. Archaeologists uncovered small burial sites, like the one in La Ferracie, France, where only a handful of individuals were discovered. These fragments of the past were pieced together into a story of small, struggling families scraping by in a frozen world. And honestly, that idea stuck. It made sense. Fewer people meant fewer mouths to feed, especially when resources were scarce. But that's only part of the story. And as more discoveries came in, the narratives started to shift. Neanderthals weren't loners. They were social beings, complex, cooperative, and capable. New evidence, from hearth patterns to bones to ancient DNA, paints a very different picture. It shows Neanderthal groups weren't just surviving, they were thriving. And not in groups of 10, more like 20 to 30, similar in size to modern hunter-gatherer bands. Let that sink in. The difference between them and us wasn't how many of them there were, it was how they lived within the land. So if you're enjoying this journey into the real lives of our ancient cousins, take a second to subscribe to Prehistoric Medievals. We're just getting started.
Let's look at one of the most fascinating sites, La Côte de Sembrelade, a coastal cave on the island of Jersey. Around 180,000 years ago, Neanderthals hunted woolly mammoths and rhinos here, massive creatures that weighed over 10 tons. And they weren't bringing them down solo. It takes a coordinated team to hunt, kill, and butcher an animal that size. Archaeologists estimate you'd need at least 4 to 8 strong hunters, with others preparing tools, managing fires, and processing meat. That already puts the number beyond 10. And the site supports it. Multiple hearths, tool fragments scattered throughout, bones in every corner. It's the footprint of a group of 25, maybe even 30. France's Combe Grenal Cave offers more. Dozens of hearths spanning thousands of years, each surrounded by tools, scrapers, and animal remains. Not the debris of a lone family, but of a structured group working together. Anthropologist Paul Mellers, in The Neanderthal Legacy, points out that small groups wouldn't need so many fires, or such a wide variety of tools. We're talking about a community here, not just a cluster. And that sense of community becomes even clearer the more sites we examine. In Shanidar Cave in Iraq, Neanderthals buried their dead, some of whom had serious injuries that had healed. That means care. That means support. That means a group big enough to carry the weight when one member couldn't contribute. And alongside the burials, hearths, pollen from what may have been medicinal plants, and layers of animal bones. This wasn't a place of solitude. It was a place of life, of shared meals, of conversations and warmth in the cold. And once again, we're seeing numbers that hover around 20 to 30 individuals, big enough to thrive, but small enough to move together.
Now, you might be wondering, why does this myth of the lonely Neanderthal persist? Why do we keep coming back to that image of the 10-person cave family? Part of it is storytelling. A small group fighting the elements is a powerful narrative, but another part of it is about evidence. Smaller sites are easier to find and excavate. Temporary hunting camps with just a few hearths get mistaken for the whole picture, but they're just pieces. The real picture, that's built from comparing dozens of sites, running DNA studies, and modeling population needs. So if you love peeling back the layers of prehistoric myths like this, Make sure you subscribe to Prehistoric Medievals. There's so much more to uncover. And speaking of more, there's a key question we need to ask next. If Neanderthal groups were about the same size as those of early modern humans, why did modern humans thrive while Neanderthals vanished? The answer isn't about group size. It's about territory, diet, and adaptability. Stay with me, because the next 5 minutes might change how you see the entire story of our ancient relatives. All right, so now that we know Neanderthals weren't just isolated in small, fragile groups, let's dig into the next big question. Why didn't they last while modern humans did? It turns out the answer has less to do with how many Neanderthals there were and more to do with how they lived off the land. Both Neanderthals and modern humans lived in groups of around 20 to 30 individuals, but there's a crucial difference between the two: territory size and resource use. Neanderthals had a major reliance on megafauna, large, often migratory animals like mammoths, rhinos, and bison. This required massive ranges to track these herds across Ice Age Europe. Neanderthal groups roamed vast stretches of land, with home ranges estimated to be anywhere from 500 to 1,500 square kilometers, and during the course of a year, they could cover 2,000 to 5,000 kilometers. They didn't just hunt these animals for the meat, they used every part of them, from bones for tools to hides for clothing. It was an all-in approach to survival, but it came with risks. A single mammoth kill could feed a group for weeks, but if the herds didn't come through or a hunt failed, the consequences were disastrous. By contrast, modern humans had a much broader and more flexible approach to hunting. They didn't rely solely on big game animals. Instead, they hunted smaller game, fished, and gathered plants. This diversification allowed them to survive in smaller, resource-rich territories. Modern human territories were far more compact, usually ranging from 200 to 800 square kilometers, sometimes even smaller. They also developed new tools, like bows and arrows, fishing nets, and spear throwers, which allowed them to hunt smaller prey more efficiently. These innovations meant they didn't have to roam over huge distances to find food. In other words, they didn't need to expend as much energy just to stay alive. This efficiency gave modern humans a clear edge. With smaller territories and more diverse food sources, they could sustain themselves in denser populations, while Neanderthals had to cover vast areas and risk long, energy-draining hunts. When food resources became scarce, or the climate changed, modern humans had more flexibility to adapt. They could switch to hunting smaller game, or even rely on plant-based food, while Neanderthals, dependent on large mammals, faced a much more volatile existence. But it wasn't just about diet. Neanderthal social dynamics were tied to the demands of their environment. With such large territories, they needed to stay spread out, and their groups were more isolated from each other. Modern humans, however, could stay in closer proximity because their smaller territories allowed for greater interaction. This meant that modern humans could form larger, more interconnected networks, trading tools, ideas, and even mates. Neanderthals, living across wider stretches of land, may have had less contact with other groups, limiting their social and genetic diversity. This isolation also meant less exchange of crucial survival knowledge and tools. As modern humans became more resourceful, they developed strategies and innovations that allowed them to thrive in ways Neanderthals could not. The lack of genetic diversity in Neanderthal populations also played a role in their eventual extinction. With groups spaced far apart and fewer opportunities for intergroup contact, the Neanderthal gene pool became smaller and smaller. Genetic studies show that Neanderthals avoided inbreeding to some extent, but even with this, their small, isolated groups likely struggled to sustain a healthy, viable population over generations. A larger population, with frequent contact between groups, would have been better equipped to adapt to changing climates and environments, but Neanderthals didn't have that luxury. And let's not forget, the changing climate played a significant role too. As the Ice Age ended, many of the megafauna Neanderthals relied on began to die out. With fewer mammoths and rhinos to hunt, Neanderthals found themselves without the large, predictable food sources they had depended on for survival.
Meanwhile, modern humans were already using a broader range of resources, which allowed them to withstand these shifts in the environment. One of the most important lessons here is that Neanderthals weren't primitive or doomed to failure because they were less capable. They were survivors, but their strategy for survival, focused on large animals and vast territories, wasn't as adaptable to the changing world around them. Modern humans, on the other hand, used a more flexible approach, allowing them to thrive in smaller territories and adapt more easily to new challenges. This flexibility may have ultimately given humans the edge in the long run. But let's not forget, Neanderthals weren't alone in their vast landscapes. They were part of a rich tapestry of prehistoric life. Their larger territories may have kept them apart, but when they did meet other groups, it wasn't always hostile. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neanderthals traded tools and may have even mated with early humans, contributing to the genetic legacy we carry today. So, when we think about Neanderthals, let's not picture a group of isolated, lonely survivors. Let's picture vibrant, complex communities, groups of 20 to 30 people who lived in challenging environments but were capable, social, and adaptive. They weren't just isolated stragglers. They were a thriving part of the prehistoric world, sharing, cooperating, and surviving together. And while their time eventually came to an end, their legacy is still with us, etched in the bones, tools, and caves they left behind. The next time you hear the myth of the lonely Neanderthal, remember, they weren't alone at all. They were a part of a rich social tapestry, living, hunting, and thriving, much like us. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the lives of Neanderthals, don't forget to subscribe to Prehistoric Medievals. There's much more to uncover as we continue to explore the fascinating world of our ancient ancestors.